All right, let's get started then. Welcome to this webinar, which is long overdue. My name's Jim Tanburn. I am a coordinator for the DCED. I'm just introducing things. The topic of this webinar is what we're calling the Toolkit for implementing the DCED Standard for results measurement. The standard has been around for 10 years now. 2008 is when we first launched it. So that's 11 years. And during that time, people have asked us for advice and practical tips on what to do on Monday morning. There are various templates that have been floating around during that time, and some of you may already have seen the intervention guide that we have been calling the intervention guide. Essentially, it's a format for planning your monitoring work during implementation of a program. Very practical, a lot of copies floating around, so you may already have seen it, but this is the first time that we've released one officially as DCED. So hopefully you will have seen it before, and if you haven't, then this will be the introduction. And if you have seen it before, this will give you some practical ideas on how to use it most efficiently. What we're going to do, we're going to have an introduction, a little bit about the DCED standard, then the intervention plan, research plan, and Q&A. So please do submit your questions if things are not clear or if we're not covering what you want us to cover. Let me hand over to Nabanita, and then Adam will take over from Nabanita later on. So Nabanita, let me pass to you. You've got your camera on.
Thank you, Jim, for the introduction. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. My name is Nabanita Bekkers. I also work for the DCED Secretariat, and I also work as a consultant in results measurement. Thank you for joining us today. So before we start, we thought it would be nice to get to know the group a little better. So I'm going to go over and do a survey. If you can all take 2 minutes to answer the questions that we have posted on your screen. So you can basically choose your answers and then vote at the end of it. And I'll give you a minute to finish. Yeah, we see people answering. Give it 10 more seconds. Okay, I will share the results so that we know each other a little better. I hope you can see it on the screen. So we have a few new people over here who don't know much about the standards, so it would be good to talk through with that. We also have a lot of new people who haven't attended a DCED webinar before, so thank you again for joining us. And in terms of your favorite animals, the clear winner is a dog. Great, I would have voted for a dog too. Anyways, to get started, let me maybe first start by telling everyone a little bit about the DCED standard. Now, what is the DCED standard? It is a quality assurance standard like other standards such as the ISO. It provides basically a framework for the minimal good practices in results measurement and private sector development against which a project's results measurement system can be assessed to check if they are following those good practices. Now, this framework comprises of 7 elements. First, in order to set out the vision for the results measurement system, we asked projects to start by articulating the results chain. So the results chains are basically theories of change to show what a project is doing in order to achieve its results. I won't go much into the details of it right now because my colleague Adam will go on to explaining that a bit better. But after defining the results chain, the standard asks for projects to define their indicators of changes. So this is, again, very related to first articulating what they're doing and then setting indicators against those. Then what the standard has is few more elements, which is for measuring the changes. So the first one is about measuring attributable change. So this is about basically when we talk about attribution, we're talking about, what are the changes that are plausibly caused by what the project is doing in addition to what could have happened otherwise. And another element is measuring the wider changes in the system and market. So again, the DCED standard is a results measurement standard for private sector development. And a lot of projects working in private sector development work in order to create systemic changes, which is basically working within systems such as markets or government agencies to create changes that can be lasting or benefit other people beyond direct beneficiaries. So the standard has an element to also look into that. And finally, it's also about basically having a system to manage the project. So we have like 3 other elements which talk about relating costs to project results. So this is, again, basically to see what input is going into a project and what sort of output is coming across for it. Then, of course, reporting the results that are measured by this entire system. And finally, the standard calls for projects to have a system for actually managing the results measurement system. So this is about basically having enough human resources in places, having enough financial resources, and finally, of course, using the system whereby results are generated to actually influence decision making. Now, why would you use something like the DCED standard? There's a few reasons that we find the results measurement, the DCED standard for results measurement has been adopted. One of the reasons is that it is really a very clear and practical system. So the DCED standard has really been developed in consultation with field practitioners. This has made it very practical. Because it sort of sets the foundation for the different things you need to put in place in order to do results measurement. It already lists the thing that you need to think about when designing the results measurement. So it basically makes sure that it is a system. If you adopt that then you don't need to reinvent the wheel because these are the different things that you need to consider when you design your system. It is another main objective of using the standard is to ensure the quality. The DCED standard uses results chain and you continuously get information based on that. So what it makes it is that this is a system which is continuously validating results in the field. This makes you look at what you're achieving and revising your strategy based on it. So that makes you ensure that you're basically managing your projects in an adaptive manner because you're constantly reflecting on the results you're getting to see whether your activities are leading to the changes that you've initially set out to be caused. Finally, the DCED standard, it has an option of getting, if you're using the standard, you can also get audited by auditors. The DCED has a pool of auditors who are external people who can go and visit a project and check their results measurement system against the compliance criteria of the DCED standard. So this basically gives it an external objective view where another external person can go and look into the internal system of a project and basically give it that quality assurance by looking at it, assessing it, and sharing the results. The compliance with the standard can bring more recognition from donors, as well as the wider community of being seriously engaged in results measurement. So right now with the DCED standard, we have over 150 projects who are using it in some form or the other, spread over in 50 countries. We already have a couple of questions coming in. So just to go back to that, we will answer that once we are done through the presentation. But please go on. If you have any questions related to the presentation, please do post that in. Now, as Jim said, we have been asked also to share examples for like common tools that can be used when applying the DCED standard. If you go to the DCED website, you will find many case studies and practical examples of various projects which are applying the DCED standard. So these are really adapted to that. In addition to that, what we've done is that we have made a toolkit with common tools which can be used in results measurement. So in this DCED website, what we have is a template for things such as an intervention guide, which is really a common tool, which needs to be adapted to projects which are applying the DCED standard. In addition to that, we are also thinking about including other examples such as research plans, such as template to what sort of like meetings you should have in order to reflect on your results. So these are like the different tools which we've found out over the years are common to like different projects who are applying the standard. Now, to go to the first tool, I'm going to start by talking about an intervention guide. Now, before going on to an intervention guide, I would like to first take a step back and talk about what an intervention is, because that's important. Because the premise of the entire DCED standard is sort of built around making these intervention-specific results chains. Now, what is an intervention? Now, in a PSD project, what we often have is a common goal. So these are the bigger goals that you have for a project. This can be things like creating poverty alleviation, creating more jobs for people, increasing income for people, or improving resilience for people. In order to do that, you can do it probably by different set of activities. For example, if we consider a program trying to improve, say, income of farmers, in order to do that, you can do it by several interventions. The first intervention could be by getting these farmers to use improved seeds. So for instance, you can have an intervention with a big seed company where you introduce a good quality seed, and using that, farmers can improve their productivity, which will help them again lead to the overall program aim of higher income for farmers. Secondly, you can have another intervention, say, which is about improving these same farmers to better markets. So again, like say, if you introduce these farmers to like to a supermarket chain or somewhere else where they can sell their produce directly, they get a better price. So again, it helps the farmers to sell their produce for a higher income. You can have another intervention, which is, say, about improving their access to finance. So this intervention can be linking the same farmers to banks or to microinsurance companies so that they're better safeguarded against climatic change, etc. Or like they can they can access microfinance loans in order to make an investment in their farming practices. So the reason why it is important to know what these interventions are is because there's a difference between working with specific interventions and looking at the program as a whole. Now, what the DCD asks what the DCD standard asks projects to do is to basically look at individual interventions and define their individual results chain and define their individual measurement plan. The reason that it is important to do so is to inform the day-to-day management. So for instance, if you're doing a specific activity related to intervention 1, are you now causing the change that you were expected? If not, do you need to do something to change it? This allows you to manage adaptively because you can base decision making based on like what are the results that are happening in real time. So moving on, what is an intervention? So moving on, what is an intervention guide? Now, an intervention guide, this is a tool which allows you to design the measurement for a specific intervention. So again, like going back into that specific results chain that we spoke about, we look into a specific intervention and try to design first what is it you are trying to change as a result of that intervention, then how will you go about to measure it, and then of course, how do you actually once you gather information against it, how do you actually gain how do you actually analyze that information to make your results. Now, the purpose of having an intervention guide is to have basically one tool which allows you to design the results measurement system for a specific intervention. It allows, by articulating the results chain, it allows you to understand, to get a similar understanding of what an intervention is about, what are the changes you're trying to cause as a result of that specific intervention. It allows you to think through the objective of it. And then, because you make a results chain and you make a specific measurement plan for it, you have different checkpoints at different points in time to see how that is progressing. It certainly meets the criteria of the standard in terms of like the compliance criteria that's required, because it allows you to make a specific intervention results chain. It allows you to make a measurement plan for it. It allows you to actually measure specifically for it. And it acts as the institutional memory, because what you have with an intervention guide is you try to articulate what you're causing as a result of an intervention. You define the entire measurement process of it, and you actually also reflect on the results for it. So it allows you to keep a track of like what was your initial plan for a intervention, and of course, what have you achieved because of it. This intervention guide has several tabs. So Adam, maybe you can also share a link to an intervention guide. So what we have done is that if you look through the DCD website, we have a page where we've shared an example of a worked out intervention guide. So it's an Excel sheet with different tabs, which shows you what are the different things you need to consider for an intervention guide. And we also have a worked out example. It's a fictional case, and you see an example of what each of the tabs of the intervention guide should look like. And we also have presentations. Thanks for sharing the website, Adam. And what we have are also presentation which walks you through on how to make this intervention guide. Now, an intervention guide, Adam will walk you through a results measurement, a results chain and a measurement plan. Let me just give you first an overview of the different tabs of the intervention guide. So what you start with is that you have a summary page, which basically allows you to talk about like, okay, what is it that this intervention is trying to achieve? So you talk about, what are the problems that you're trying to, what are the constraints that you're trying to address as a result of an intervention? What is the business model? What are you trying to do? Who are the different players that are involved? What are their incentives? Whether you are looking into any other cross-cutting theme, whether you're trying to look into any other cross-cutting themes through this intervention. For example, are there any gender-related issue that you're trying to address as a result of this? Are you working in anything related to the environment constraints? And of course, what are the assumptions what are the external assumptions which you expect should happen in order for this intervention to happen? Then you have a tab for a results chain. I won't talk much about results chain because my colleague Adam will next walk you through that. Then there's also a results measurement plan. So this is basically, again, related to the specific results chain. How do you measure the changes for that results chain? And you have another tab for sharing the results. Now, what I wanted to also say that like what we have as an example is a very generic, a basic template, but this would really need to be modified for your project because, every project has its own need. For instance, you might decide that, okay, in addition to the results page, we want to have another page with a calculation page where you want to share your estimations or your initial projections that you've made. What we have here is a basic template, but it's something which would need to be worked out for your individual project. I will now hand over to Adam, who will talk you more through what a results chain is.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay,
yes,
thanks
Adam.
a lot. Right, let's go through. So I'm just going to take you through very briefly what are the different parts of the intervention guide, the kind of toolkit available on the DCED website. And the first step in the intervention guide is the results chain. And this the results chain is basically a diagram showing what you're doing, what are your different activities, and how are you expected to reach your impact. And I guess to immediately address Loretta's point, she sent a really good question of how is a results chain in the DCED framework different from using a logical framework and an M&E plan attached to it. I think a lot of the intuitions are very similar. We're going to go through similar questions about setting out what you're expecting to achieve, the logic of your program, developing an M&E plan based on it. But what I think a lot of private sector development programs have found is that a logical framework is a very blunt tool for trying to assess the impact of the project, because the logical framework typically is done at a project level. So you have an awful lot of detail which is missed out of it. A results chain allows you to go into a lot more detail, basically to avoid what you see in this picture here, where there's a lot of clarity about activities and a lot of clarity about the impact you want, but it's not clear how you're supposed to get from one to the other. So the aim of the results chain is to unpack this kind of missing middle and say, how does your advocacy and your training lead to farmers' income increase? So this might involve asking specific questions like, what kind of advocacy are you doing? Why do you think this is an important point to advocate on? What changes do you expect the government to make as a result of your advocacy? If you're looking at training of retailers, you might look at what the incentives are for retailers to give information, try and specify what these are, and understand better what farmers do with this information and how they benefit. So how you do this results chain for every single intervention which you're doing in your project. So a project might have 5 or 10 interventions, depends how kind of complex the project is. But it gives you quite a lot of granular detail about what changes you're expecting. In the toolkit, we go into a bit of detail about how you make a results chain. I'm just going to briefly go through it. An important first step is to understand the context. This is really important. Before you make a results chain, you need to understand the sectors and markets that you're working with, have talked with your partner, and have a rough understanding of the business model that you're looking for. You need to get the right people into the room. And importantly, this shouldn't just be the monitoring and evaluation team. You need to have, at a minimum, the implementation team, the management in your organization, potentially also your partners to try and give you the insights into the business model and what you're trying to achieve. And finally, you want to make sure that you align your impact among the different people in the room. In other words, everyone involved in this process should understand what you're trying to achieve. And there are lots of ways people make results chains. Some of them start with the activities and kind of build up. Others start at the impact and try to kind of build down and say what outputs and outcomes would achieve this impact. I don't want to prescribe a different way to you. We talk about this more in the guidance on the toolkit. But for now, let's just look at the most important thing about making a results chain, which is it should be a tool for you to step back and critique what you're doing. So what you'll eventually find is you end up with something like the diagram on the left. You don't need to see exactly what the boxes say, but the link I sent will give you the full detail if you want to go into it. But you'll probably have about 10 to 15 boxes describing the different levels of change you're expecting to see in your project. And teams typically find that the process of developing a results chain is helpful for clarifying their thinking and understanding the interventions better. So as you go through and at the end of your results chain development, make sure you look back and ask questions like, are you making logical assumptions from one step to the other? Is it clear how one step leads to the other? Are the arrows in the right places? Have you thought about sustainability? And so on. So there's an important balance. You need your results chain to be detailed enough to be helpful in management and reporting, but simple enough to be useful and quick to adjust. So this is more than an art than a science, and you'll find the right balance really through experience and trying it out. So let's go on. Once you've got your results chain, the next kind of tab in the intervention guide is to give a measurement plan based on it. So for every step in the results chain, you want to know what's the indicator through which you measure this step. What qualitative information do you want to gather? What methods do you use in order to gather this, and who is doing it, when are they doing it, and kind of the administrative detail associated with it. And this ends up looking something like this, this measurement plan. So you kind of have a grid where it says, what are the indicators? How do you collect this data? What's the qualitative data collection needs? And so on. So it's worth saying that it's to do this effectively, you need to keep the information quite light. If you write in too much information, it gets very difficult to update. And of course, the fact that you have different indicators doesn't mean that you need a different measurement kind of method for each indicator. Generally, you have a lot of indicators measured through, for example, one survey or one reporting. So we'll talk quickly about baselines. A question we get a lot, especially in private sector development, is when do we do our baseline? And how do we do it? And there's a big risk. A lot of projects find that programs do a big baseline survey right at the beginning, and then find that it's very difficult to use the findings. And this is for two main reasons. Sometimes because the baseline survey didn't collect the right information, because it was conducted before the results chains and before the indicators had been put together. And sometimes it didn't ask the right people, because the baseline was conducted before the intervention had really selected the target group. And as you probably know, in private sector development, the target group is often quite unpredictable, because it might be based on who wants to buy a certain service or where your private partner wants to go. So it's not always easy to know right at the beginning. So in general, to get an effective baseline, rather than doing it straight at the beginning of a program, you need to wait as long as possible before doing it. Wait until the intervention is fixed, until the target group have been identified, and then do your baseline as quickly as possible. Another thing which you'd look at through the design of the intervention guide template is assessing attribution. And this is really the question of to what extent were measured changes due to your project. This is often quite an intimidating, thing for programs to look at, as the scary monster makes clear. And I think the reason is to really assess attribution in a kind of, to be certain about it, you often need to design your project in a certain way with randomization involved or some kind of control group. This is sometimes possible, but not always possible for projects in the field. So the DCED standard just requires that you look at attribution as best you can. At a minimum, gathering qualitative information to understand the attribution between the different steps in the results chain, and asking, is there plausible evidence that one step in the results chain leads to the step above it? So, Nabanita, I think I'll hand back to you for the research plan discussion.
Thank you, Adam. I hope you can hear me now. Okay. Thanks, Adam, for that. I will start by explaining what a research plan is. A research plan is a foundation document that sets out the thoughts for research in a logical and concise manner. Now, this is a little bit different from the measurement plan that Adam was talking about. A measurement plan is sort of like almost like the first stage of making a research plan, because the measurement plan looks at, say, for instance, the whole picture of, say, it looks at the whole results chain and then says like, okay, this is, for this change, say like, at the higher level where you have farmers improving productivity, you need to do something like you need to measure their productivity, you need to do this annually, and these are the qualitative information you need to collect. So that gives you basically the general picture of like, what are the different points in time, for instance, when you need to do research, what do you need to check? But the research plan is then the specific step which allows you to look into like that specific research. So for instance, relating it to one of the particular tabs in a measurement plan, which could be about, say, assessing a service provider's change in behavior, or say like finding out when farmers, whether they have improved productivity at that certain point in time. What is, it lays out the foundation for like, okay, how do you now conduct that research in a specific manner? So just if I go back into that tab that Adam had put in for the measurement plan, say for instance, in a particular point in time you have a research, okay, this is actually more at the activity level, but say for instance you have at a certain point in time in February 2017 you need to do a research there. How do you actually specifically design a research for it? I will give you an example of what a research plan template can look like. So a research plan can be for any point in research. So it could be for that generic baseline, as Adam spoke about. Sometimes projects during the intervention design might find out that like, okay, we need to find out by talking with a few market players what is the need for a certain intervention. So it could be, that could be actually a purpose of doing the research. It could be to do a specific baseline. So once you have an intervention in place and you actually have a better idea of like who are the people that might be benefited as a result of that specific intervention, you might want to do a baseline assessment to see what are their initial performance, and after a certain point you would want to measure and see whether changes has occurred to those baseline performance as a result of your intervention. It could be the purpose of it could be a monitoring visit to again see, okay, whether your intervention is going in track as you planned. You could also have a research plan as a final impact assessment. So this would be really at a latter stage, so maybe 1 or 2 years after actual completion of activities to see whether results are happening. Messenger, you have a question again on what is the difference between a research plan and monitoring and evaluation plan. Okay, I'll just go back to that and I'll try to answer this. So the measurement, the monitoring and evaluation plan, that is initially this tab that Adam had shown you. So this is basically for the entire results chain. This applies for each of the change boxes that you have in this results chain. You make a plan of like, okay, what are the indicators you need to assess for it? How will you do that? So, basically say, for instance, suppose one of the changes is that as a result of a specific intervention related to improving the access of seeds, the benefit that you expect is that farmers start buying those seeds, then they start using those seeds, and as a result of that, they have improved income. Now, for this intervention, what you would have is basically a measurement plan where for each of those changes, you would try to say, okay, what are the indicators that you need to see happening? For instance, for the farmers buying the seed, you want to see whether a company is making enough sales of a particular kind of seed. Then for farmers using seeds, you would basically want to go and assess, say, like, how much seeds are farmers using, how many farmers are using the seeds. Now, so you basically have indicators related to each of the specific boxes in the results chain. And in this monitoring in this MRM plan, what you have is then like, you have basically you define also how you measure it and when you measure it. So for instance, in order to measure the change for whether, say, a company is having increased sales of like seeds, you might want to do an in-depth interview with the company to see like, or you might want to see their sales record to see like whether it's changing. So that is what you would put in this how to measure. For the farmers actually buying and using seeds, you might plan to do something like a small survey of like 20 farmers. So in this how to measure, you would basically say, okay, we do a survey of farmers and this is when you do it. So it gives you basically the measurement plan, gives you an overview for all the different measurement points of an intervention, and then how you would do it and like when you would do it. A research plan then basically zooms into one specific research. So for instance, if you say that like you're going to do a survey of farmers to find out whether they are using seeds, the research plan will look into that specific research and try to lay down the framework of like how you will do that design. So for example, you would have like, for the purpose of the research, for that specific intervention, you can say that like it is to do a monitoring research to find out whether farmers are now using good quality seeds and what happens as a result of that. So it really zooms into the a specific measurement point and tries to like address, tries to identify what are the research questions that you try to answer with that, and how you will do that. And the how you will do it goes into the research methodology. So things like, what are the types of respondents you want to talk with? For instance, do you want to talk with small farmers? Do you only want to talk with farmers, or do you want to also talk with the retailers who are selling the seeds to them? What is the purpose of talking to them? What sample size will you look at? And, how will you do that sampling? For instance, are you purposively going to a few selected people who you think are using it? Or do you want to actually randomly go to any people to a village and find out how many people are using it? So this is really zooming into that research, to the research details of like how you would actually gather information to address the questions that you wanted to ask with that research. In a research plan, the other things you want to look beyond the results, beyond the research methodology, is like what sort of attribution strategy. Going into Adam's last point about like what the DCED standard asks you to do is like identify a method for like plausibly finding out like whether change is happening as a result of the actions that you're doing. So this might mean either asking the how and why questions. It could be using different methods such as a comparison with a control group. So in this tab, you would try to basically establish how, what attribution strategy you're trying to assess as a result of this intervention. If it is a baseline, then you might even think about like not having an attribution strategy at that point, and probably during the monitoring phase. So that's fine. And then what we also have as another of the questions is like, what are the key research questions? So what are the main research questions that you are trying to address as a result of doing this research? So again, like as we say, that what we have in this toolkit are just a few examples of the things that you need to consider when doing it. So, you can really make this research plan much more customized to your project. So, you can make it much more specific, like, putting in cross-cutting issues, going into more details of sampling. So it really would need to be adapted to your project's needs. In addition to laying out the foundation for the research that you're doing, you would basically have subsequent tabs then with the specific questionnaires to do research. Then, of course, a template for putting in the data and the actual data analysis and presenting the summary of findings. So this research plan is, again, a template that we are making right now. We haven't really put it up on the website, but this will be there in the coming month. And again, can be customized for your specific project. Now, just taking a step back, why do we do all these things? So, why do we make the intervention guide? Why do you make a research plan? Ultimately, what the standard asks for you to do is really use these tools in order to use information to manage your project. So we use the results chain we use an intervention guide in order to lay out the framework for how you would design the results measurement related to a specific intervention. Then you use a tool such as a research plan in order to make to zoom in into the research of at a specific point in time. And ultimately, you use these tools to basically gain information and find out what change is happening as a result of your intervention. So you use information that you collect to reflect back on your results chain and see that the initial changes that you had outlined in your results chain, is it really happening as expected? If so, why is it happening? The why question related to attribution. Are the changes now happening because of the activities that you are doing, or is there now a market distortion? Is there another NGO who's really speeding up the process, or is there now a certain hike in prices which have made farmers income rise because of that, and it's not really because of using good quality seeds? And if, of course, change is not happening, then why is it? If you've done an intervention which has, say, for instance, improved access to finance, and then you see actually that people don't end up using the loans, or they use up the loans not for their farming but for their personal reasons, then that's not really, the change is not happening as you had expected. And if so, then do you now need to take any other action do you need to take subsequent action in order to modify the results? And of course, to find out whether changes are being sustainable in the longer run. Is it really happening? Will it continue? If not, why? So you collect information on, to reflect back on whether changes are happening. And as a result of this, you can use that information to really think strategically for your project management. So, to think about okay, should you now revise what you're doing in the intervention? Do you need to do additional interventions? What does it mean for the overall strategy? Are there other gaps that you need to address? So ultimately, the intervention guide as well as the research plans, these are all tools which allow you to collect information related to results that you're trying to achieve. And then as a result of that, you use that information to actually inform your forward decision making. Now I will pass it on to Adam.
Okay, thank you. Maybe, Nabanita, if you keep your video on, and then we can both answer the questions.
Sure, thank you.
Good. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We've got to the questions and answers button. We have about we have about 20 minutes left. Please ask any questions you have about monitoring or the DCED standard, but also we'll be really interested to hear if there's any additional tools which you have found useful in your own work, or which you would really value if we could produce as part of this toolkit. But I wanted to start maybe by I'll start by looking at a couple of questions which came in. So going back to Charles's question about the DAC criteria and the DCED standard, I think Jim answered, but just so everyone can hear, I think the basic difference is that the DAC evaluation criteria, as the name suggests, it's really an evaluation method. It's how do you go in periodically and assess the quality and the progress of a project. While the DCED standard is designed much more as an internal tool for monitoring both at the kind of activity output level, but also to enable program managers to try and monitor up until the outcome impact level in order to steer their project. So that's the main difference, I think, from my perspective. In terms of indicators, Loretta asked about indicators for private sector development. And there are 3 recommended indicators in the DCED standard. And this is firstly jobs, number of jobs created. assessed using full-time equivalent jobs. Secondly, income, amount of additional income for example, farmers using improved seed in your case. And thirdly, scale, which means how many people have experienced a benefit, an increase in income. I think what we found is that these three indicators are relevant for a lot of projects in private sector development, but not for all of them. And so we do encourage programs to use these indicators where possible, but to use different impact level indicators if appropriate. Nabanita, do you want to add to either of those? And maybe you could take also Akanef's question on recommended timeframe.
Okay. I don't have anything. I think you've answered those pretty clearly, Adam, so I don't have anything to add on it. Ekanath, going to your question on what is the recommended time frame to carry out this process per intervention. Okay, so in the DCED standard, one of the things that we say, again, like what we've found out is that specifically when you work in private sector development, because change takes a longer time to occur, because you're working through these to change market systems, we find typically that like up to 3 years after the end of activities is a good point to look into that. But again, it is very specific to really the interventions. To give an example, you can be working in sectors where it might, your activities might take much more longer time to give results. For instance, I was working with a project which worked in palm oil, and if you use better quality seedlings, ultimately you will only see a difference after 6 years. So in that change, that is an exceptional case where the project decided that they have to actually measure, in their second phase of the project. So it really varies, but normally we see up to 2 to 3 years after end of activities is probably a good time frame to look into that. In terms of recommended frequency, the standard sort of, it's a very pragmatic way of looking into things. So I think like what the standard says is like based on your human resources and your financial resources, try to do things in a practical manner. What we typically see is that like in terms of monitoring, people find it useful to do monitoring at least periodically every year. And when you use the measurement plan, sometimes when we look into results measurement, we try to put it in its own specific silo. So, we look into a measurement plan and, we say that like, okay, this, needs to be measured separately and it requires an assessment. When you see those boxes, that's what you tend to think. But actually, that's not the case, because often when intervention managers are in the field, they're actually getting data on the run. So a lot of the information in measurement plan is actually part of your intervention management, and it is coming in. So it's a matter of just like making sure that you reflect on that and put it in. Does that sort of answer your question, Eknath? And Adam, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I thought that was a good response.
Adam, do you want to take in the next question?
Attribution one.
Yeah.
Yep, my favorite question. So thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen, because there's kind of an image. This is a question which comes up. Oh, I don't know if I can share my screen. That sounds. That looks a bit complicated. Okay, I think it's best for me not to try any new kind of new technological tricks now. So the difference between contribution and attribution is a question which is often raised, especially for something like a market systems program, where what they're trying to do is not just increase the yield of a few farmers, for example, but to change a market system or the structure of the market. And here people say quite rightly that it's very difficult to attribute any change to your program. So instead you should look at contribution. So what is this difference between contribution and attribution? The way I think about it is that if you are able to specify an exact counterfactual in kind of numerical terms, then you can look at attribution. If you're able to say that without our program, there would have been, let's say, an income of 10. With our program, there's an income of 11. You're able to subtract one from the other, and you get your attributable impact, which is an additional 1. Contribution, on the other hand, is when you can't really quantify or specify exactly what would have happened without your program. An example is if you're doing like lobbying or advocacy work, you can't like, if you advocate for a law to be passed, you can't really say, well, without our program, the law would definitely not have been passed. Normally, that's kind of an exaggeration of your impact. And you also can't say that half the law or 75% of the law would have been passed, because that doesn't really make sense. So this is why people look at contribution. They say, we have this change. We can't say exactly what we contributed to it, but we want to show that we did make a difference. And in terms of measuring your contribution, trying to assess it, the way to do it is generally by having a good results chain and looking at each stage, how did you contribute? So if your results chain is going up to the passing of a new law, you want to say, what activities did we do towards this? What policymakers did we influence? In what ways did we kind of have an influence on this policymaking process? And then through tracing this contribution, you can't make a quantitative judgment, but you can say to what extent did we contribute or not. Nabanita, do you want to add?
No, I think that's actually a pretty good summary of it.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so Javier was
Typing something here. I can also see that.
While he's typing, do you want to answer maybe the question about burdensome, costly data collection? It's one of the questions we had in our pre-webinar survey.
Okay. That was the question on how to avoid. Okay. We had a question basically on how to avoid data collection becoming burdensome. Specifically, when you work with private businesses, we thought that's actually a very good question. I think ultimately it's about two things. One is about like really aligning your interests to, when you especially partner with a private sector company, it's important to know, okay, what are their objectives? What are the things they're trying to get? And then, of course, filtering out what information is useful for them to collect and getting that from them. So, for instance, I think common examples could be that, like, if you're working with a private company in order to increase sales of a certain product, can you actually look at the sales data and use that in order to make in order to calculate your outreach, or try to gauge what's the impact of it. With private companies specifically, I do think it is a bit unrealistic to expect them to have the same objectives that a development program would have. So that's why the standard also asks you to think about making sure you have enough financial and human resources in order to do the assessment yourself. So again, for instance, it might be, from a private company, it might be easier to get data such as their sales or who they are reaching. But to expect them to actually go and measure the results on their clients, that might be maybe unrealistic unless it actually serves their interest for getting marketing data or something. So I think ultimately, with private businesses, you need to make this choice between what is also useful for them to collect, can that information benefit them, and then trying to sort of balance it out between them and yourself. Do you want to add something to that, Adam?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think a good understanding of the company's data collection system is really important. So understanding sitting in their office and being able to say, okay, in their database, they collect this variable, they don't collect this variable, they don't have a system, it's just bits of paper flying around. This would really help you kind of focus the system in a way which is easy for them to respond to. And I think the other reason this is such a problem that businesses complain about burdensome data collection is that what I've often seen is that development programs get unreasonable demands from their donor. The donor is like, I want you to measure the impact on women empowerment. And rather than thinking of it themselves, the program then passes this down to the business and says, okay, we're partnering with you. We want you to report to us on women empowerment. And so I think being thoughtful about what you are asking the business to do, not passing on demands like that, but
being realistic in
exactly
what you can expect.
Is really important.
Javier has a question on Adam. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can give a first tap. So as you rightly said, Javier, The DCED standard has a section on measuring program costs and reporting results. This is normally quite an easy thing for programs to do. As long as you have a normal financial management system, most programs would get like full marks on this aspect for DCED standard. As you say in your question, it's possible to go beyond just measuring costs and measuring results to measuring value for money. And this kind of means relating your costs to your results in a way that allows you to say, we put in X amount for this bit of a program, Y amount here, we get so many results here, so many there. So the former is better value for money. We get more for what we put in. This isn't like a formal part of the DCED standard. The DCED standard certainly helps with this calculation because if you follow it properly, you should end up with fairly high quality, consistent results, ideally using common indicators which enable comparison. But it's not possible in all situations. It does require you to have very finely grained financial information, which is a lot of work. In my last program, we measured value for money, but it requires a lot of effort to say, okay, this senior manager or this MRM team member, which intervention how do we allocate their costs between different interventions? That's quite difficult. And secondly, it requires a certain level of consistency in your results. So if you have one program which is consistently trying to, for example, raise productivity, value for money calculations can maybe be done quite easily. But if you have lots of different bits of your program doing different things in different places, these value for money calculations won't really make sense because you're comparing apples and oranges. Nabanita, do you want to add?
No, I think that precisely, yeah, I don't have more to add. That precisely answers the question. I hope it does for you also, Harriet.
Yes. Great. We do have a couple of minutes in case anyone has an additional comment to bring or like suggestions for additional tools that would be helpful. But unless anyone starts typing quickly, I think we'll close the webinar. Jim, do you want to say a final word? You're muted if you're speaking. Yep, we can hear you now, Jim.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam and Nabanita. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Nice to see some exchange between people in the webinar. Do contact us later if you have any more confusion or how to assure DQA implementation. Adam, Nabanita, I don't know if you want to say anything about DQA implementation. I'm not quite sure what DQA actually is.
Yeah, I think that's my response as well. I guess quality assurance, maybe. Is that right? Yeah, assuming it is data quality assurance, I think it depends completely what type of data you're talking about. But I don't think there's a generic answer to that question. It's often a challenge of verifying the quality of data reported from your partner companies. In that case, you would need to look into the data, compare for consistency between different timeframes, make sure, give it a sense check, make sure that it kind of fits with, let's say, other pieces of information you have. There's a completely separate question about how do you assure the data quality from surveys, which gets you into questions of using mobile phones to improve the quality of the data collected. What else? You can use GPS signals. Sorry, don't need to go on.
No, I think, and just to add to what Adam is saying, and then also for the overall system, I think one of the things that the standard also requires you to look at is a bigger aggregation system. So it looks into like how are the numbers coming in, whether you have actually checks and measures to check the quality of it, how is results analyzed, and of course whether you do things like when you aggregate results, are you looking for checks like things like taking things like overlap into account. So I think like it does in terms of DQA, there is this entire thing about looking at the broader picture of how results are calculated and like whether that source and calculation is properly documented and it could be just traced down. So that's I would say like the broader level of that check.
It does remind me, thank you both, does remind me that I was going to say we're beginning to plan now for the next seminar. Every 2 years we have a seminar on results measurement, which last year was combined with market systems, and we'll do the same again next year, so September next year. And we're starting to ask people what they would like the seminar to cover, and data quality, data collection, modern technologies for collecting data is something that's being mentioned quite a lot. So if you do have a theme you'd like to see covered, either because you want to learn more, because you want to talk about it and have something to offer, please do get back to us. We'd welcome that. Now is a very good time to do that, and we'll probably be in touch with you by email directly anyway. So otherwise, thank you all very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Nabanita and Adam, and see you for the next webinar. Goodbye for now.